Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Title IX team webinar. We hope that you all had a very relaxing July 4th holiday weekend and that you've come ready with questions about Title IX training. I'm Jackie Gadapour-Werns, and I'm joined by my partner, Jennifer Smith. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello, good afternoon.
And with that, since we only have 30 minutes, let's jump right in. So we start out with just some general ground rules or just directions. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask your questions, and we will do our best to answer those questions. You can also always send questions to our Title IX email account, which is title9@fransic.com. So if you're ever just sitting around thinking, wow, this would be something that I'd like the Fransic Title IX team to cover, you can always shoot us an email at that email address, and we'll do our best to either answer it directly there or to work it into our next webinar.
Great, and speaking of our next webinar, put a save the date on your calendar. Jackie and I will be doing a webinar focused on LGBTQ rights. And there's been a number of developments in this area, so that should be a topic of high interest and with new things to discuss. So looking forward to that. That's coming up on Thursday, July 22nd. So I think that's in 2 weeks.
All right, so let's talk about training. This has been a topic that we have discussed before during these team meetups, but we wanted to do a deeper dive because we've received a lot of questions. And so we know that the school year is over or almost over, and that many people are thinking about what kind of training they're going to put in place for next year. So the first question you're probably asking yourself is, wait, are these Title IX rules even going to still be in effect next school year? And the short answer is yes, at least for now, that they are going to still be in effect. The Department of Education, so as you know, we have a new Department of Education under the Biden administration, and that the rules that we're working under were put in place under the Trump administration. And so the Biden administration has announced that they are going to amend the regulations. They are going to do this, they said in June, that they're going to do this in May of 2022. And so what that means is that in May of 2022, that is their goal deadline for when they will put out to the world their proposed revisions to the Title IX rules. And if you recall what happened under the Trump administration, they put out proposed rules. I believe it was in October of 2018. It was October, November of 2018. And then it took until May of 2020 for those rules to be issued in final form. So this is a lengthy process. And so again, the short answer is yes, we are still living under these rules as of right now, and at least for quite some time to come. Now, the Department of Education has said that they may issue guidance, and there have been some hints that that guidance will be put out before the school year starts. So we are keeping our eyes peeled. My guess is it'll be something at the last minute right before school starts, once you guys are already back in your buildings and have plenty of other things to think about. But we will keep track of any Q&As, and we will make sure to push out that information to you in a way that hopefully you can use to quickly come into compliance with any new guidance. But until that happens, nothing's changed. So we're still operating under the same training requirements as were in the 2020 Title IX rule.
So Jackie, just to emphasize what you said as far as for planning purposes, unquestionably, since we know the Biden administration, that they've announced they're not even going to propose new regulations till May, we know for sure this school year, 21-22, will be under the Trump regulations. Those are good law this school year for sure. And if you were planning looking to the future, planning your resources, it's almost impossible that 22, 23 wouldn't also be under the Trump regulations. Would you agree with that?
I think that's right. I think we're living with these regulations. The only thing that I think that they might do, and they're hinting that that this could happen, is to try to find a way to reinterpret some of the language in the regulations through guidance in a way that practically changes the effect of the rule, even though the rule itself is still in the books. To be honest, and I don't know what you think, Jennifer, but the rule's pretty straightforwardly written. So I'm not sure how much wiggle room there really is. So I think that as a practical matter, what you're saying is true. I mean, these rules are going to be, we're going to be living with them at least through the 2022-23 school year.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's there's only so far they can go with guidance because a lot we're not really so much relying on Trump guidance. All of our advice has been based on pretty clear requirements in the actual regulations that the Trump administration put out. So it would be hard if guidance conflicted with the regulations, not to get too far into the weeds, but a court at least will be looking at the regulations. And we've already seen cases come out where they dismiss guidance as non-binding and they go back to interpreting the regulations. So when you're looking at enforcement, guidance will be more relevant for OCR complaints, probably, where OCR itself will rely on its own guidance more readily. But as far as when you get to, when you ever get into court, the regulations are the regulations.
Right, right. And again, I mean, that's where when I look at the rules and I say, where could they maybe find a place for the interpretation? Because the courts do give deference to OCR's interpretation of its regulations. So if there are places where there's room for disagreement about what the regulations mean as written, they could put out guidance that gives an interpretation of that ambiguity. And I think we would expect courts to give the normal level of deference to it. But again, I agree with you. I think when you look at these rules, that there isn't a ton of room for ambiguity. They're pretty straightforward. They say you must do written cross-examination, and this must be what it includes. And you must do live cross-examination if you're in higher education, and this is what it must include. So I'm not sure how successful any efforts would be to go beyond what the rules say at this point. If anybody has thoughts, let us know in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to share them.
Okay, so moving on then, assuming that we're in this for at least 2 more years under the current regs, who must be trained and what do the rules say? And then I'll get into what do the rules say about the training. So who must be trained? You'll see some bullets as far as defining who your Title IX team is and what we kind of break it down by who has what responsibility. And so if anyone on your team has these responsibilities, they need to be trained. So as you look at new hires for the upcoming school year, or if responsibility shifted on your team, you'll want to make sure that those in these different roles, especially if they're brand new and haven't received the training for that role, they need, anyone needs training to do these roles. When the regulations became effective, they did require training. They didn't specify how frequently the training must be, but they did specify that these individuals must be trained. So I think when you're looking at what training do we have to do for the upcoming year, it's, well, who do we have in the roles and what is their level of training or need for training to accomplish those roles. So it may be that everyone was trained last year And from just a strict compliance perspective, you're relative, you're fine. Everyone's been trained in their role, and there's not a lot has changed. Or it may be you have new people or people that, yeah, they received the training, but last year was such an unusual year that they didn't really have an opportunity to exercise those muscles that they learned during the training. And I think Jackie and you and I are seeing that some people coming back into their positions a little cold from, we didn't have as many in-person interactions, and we saw at least that also reduced the amount of what would qualify as Title IX sexual harassment. So if people are cold and feel like they need a refresher because they're really not sure how to apply the training they maybe got last summer or the beginning of the school year to their current responsibilities, that would be another place. Again, you wouldn't, while it doesn't say they have to be trained annually, you wouldn't want them to get into a dispute and say, yeah, I was trained, but I didn't really know how to do it because we didn't have any complaints for a year after I was trained, something like that. So that would be a concern.
Yeah, that I would say during my time at OCR, that happened much more frequently than you would think. If you are working in an educational institution and you are responsible for deciding what training is offered, I want you to keep in mind that although you probably are really paying close attention to the training and it's really sinking in for you because this is part of your role or responsibility, that the vast majority of administrators and faculty and staff that I interviewed when I was at OCR, when asked about training, they, really weren't able to give concrete information about, when they received training or what they learned. It's a good sign that, this is the type of thing that does need to be continual in order to make sure that people are that it's really sticking. Um, and you see here too that we have this bullet about any person to whom these individuals intend to delegate responsibilities. This is something that we've seen come up a lot with K through 12 this school year as we've been implementing the new rules. It's not so much an issue in higher ed because usually in higher ed there's a department that is in place to address Title IX complaints, and so you have people to cover the specific roles. But in K through 12, where these roles tend to be a little bit more malleable, we will see situations where, there's a dean of students who's meeting with the complainant and has a really good relationship with the complainant, and the Title IX coordinator may be at the district office and not be able to break away to meet with the complainant. And so that dean would be a really great person to have do the supportive measures conversation with the complainant, but they would need to have received the basic Title IX training in order to do that. And so we do really recommend that you think very broadly about who you're training in these roles, so that you have the most options available to you. Especially when it comes to, like, if you use the Frantic training packages, that we offer a 3-hour basic training. And so if you have a number of people who you think might come in contact with these cases, but you're not really sure, put them through the basic training. That is sufficient to put them in a position where they would be able to, to offer that service if in the moment it is helpful to have them do so.
Great. And if you're looking at then what content needs to be covered, and Jackie, you talked about we do a basic training. There's not a prescribed in the regulation, not a prescribed trainer or a prescribed protocol necessarily. It's topics. It doesn't say you have to be in the training for this number of minutes in order to be properly trained, but you have to receive training in these topics. So you'll see the bullets of the topics that must be covered in your training on your screen, and it is kind of an overview of what is it that gets you through the door when you're talking about the definition, then procedurally how does the process work, and then also training on impartiality and avoiding bias throughout the process.
Yeah, and these are the training requirements for the general members of the Title IX team. Every member of the Title IX team should receive this training. There are additional requirements that apply depending on the specific role. So, for example, your decision maker, if it's a higher education context where you're required to offer a hearing, has to be trained on the technology that will be used during the hearing. And again, there's no real description of what that training entails. I serve as a hearing officer in higher education, and my training has been my in practice use of Zoom in some cases because we use Zoom as a technology. So if there was a question to me as the hearing officer or the decision maker, what was your training? I would have to be able to be ready to describe that, I've done a number of online modules through Zoom to learn how to use Zoom, that I've used Zoom in X, Y, and Z occasions. So it might not always be as obvious what the training is that is mandated, but there are specifics for some of the individual roles. So you may be wondering, especially if you went through the frantic training process last year, you may be thinking, but wait a second, we just did that. We just did this training. Why do we have to do more? And the short answer is that the comments in the rules, they do refer to subsequent training after the first year. They do this in a very roundabout way. It's not in the rule itself. It's in the provisions of the commentary to the rule that talk about how much money this should cost educational institutions. And it references that institutions will need to spend money in subsequent years for training of Title IX team members. Now, we don't know if what they were referencing is subsequent training of new Title IX team members or of old Title IX team members. That's not abundantly clear, but it is clear that there's an expectation of some level of ongoing training. And I will say again that from my experience at OCR, this is not something new. There's always been an expectation that civil rights trainings that you're offering will be ongoing and will be something that you don't just train someone once and then and it's over because, first of all, these things change very quickly, particularly in Title IX. But second of all, that recognition that you don't necessarily retain everything, especially over a number of years. Now, if you did offer training on the Title IX rules last year, I know that most of those trainings, including ours, were really hitting the fundamentals very hard because this was a brand new rule that you were all being required to comply with. So you are not required to offer that whole basic type of understanding of the rule if you did it last year. If you haven't done it, please consider doing it because I will tell you, and I know Jennifer knows this too, these cases are popping up. And so in the past, we've said, well, you technically aren't required to do these trainings until you have a complaint in front of you. That's the drop dead deadline. But these are coming more quickly, and as students get back into buildings and onto college campuses, they're going to start coming even more quickly. But consider this as an opportunity to dig more deeply into the requirements of the rules at a higher level, to work through case studies, and to work on things like writing reports for the investigators and writing decisions for decision makers, whether they're the initial decision maker or the appellate decision maker. And so, for example, if you were to use us for training for this year, our package of training that we have ready to go for this year doesn't just repeat what was covered last year. It has a much more of a practical focus of using hypotheticals to work through cases and to work on things like writing your decisions at the end of the process. So do contact us if you are looking for training packages or training options. We really do think we offer a very unique training package, unlike options where you have to pay for each person on your team to train individually. Our forensic training options cover your entire Title IX team, and so allow you to train everyone on your team for a very competitive, low flat rate. Now, that is the training of the Title IX team. that is required by the rules, but we want to also talk about the other types of trainings that are either implicit or required in the rules. So the first is that although it is not specifically in the rules, the rules do say that a school, a college, or a university has to respond to a complaint of Title IX sexual harassment anytime an official with authority or an OWA is has actual knowledge of alleged sexual misconduct. So for higher education institutions, you can identify these individuals in your policies, and usually it's a smaller population of your faculty and staff and administration than we used to have under the responsible employee um, head, headline. So you do get to designate them. However, once you do, you have to make sure that they are complying with their requirements in that role. For K-12 schools, every employee of the school or school district is an official with authority. So that means that if a student reports that they were subjected to sex-based misconduct to a custodian in the hallway, that person would be considered at that point to have actual knowledge that the school would be responsible to address. Similarly, and this is the one I always tell people that really gets people, if you've got two teachers sitting in the faculty lounge talking about that, oh, well, one of them is being sexually harassed by their boss, because if in the K-12 context, because those are two employees, that is considered a report that would require the school to act in response. So it's really important for officials with authority to know what they need to report and when. And so it's important to identify these individuals and to make sure to offer them training on a regular basis so that they are able to identify and know what to do. So this training is more limited than the training that's offered to the Title IX team members. It's not focused on, so much on the grievance process and how to address a complaint. Instead, it's focused on training on the definition of what is sexual harassment under Title IX, what are the reporting protocols, and what are the possible consequences for failure to report. And this is one of the first areas you're going to see, we're going to say this a few times, where we really want you to start thinking outside of the Title IX box. In the last year, we have been in triage mode, okay? We were running, schools and colleges and universities during a worldwide pandemic with everything shut down during a period of significant racial unrest in our country, and we had Title IX on top of it. So we really were just doing what we had to do. But now I want you to start thinking outside of that Title IX box and thinking about other laws and requirements that you have to comply with as well. And so the reason that's important is that maybe you're a higher education institution and someone isn't required to report as an official with authority, but there may be requirements under the Clery Act, there may be requirements under Illinois law that you're going to want to make sure that you are integrating into your trainings, that you're not just tunnel vision focused on Title IX. And then same thing for K-12, just because an employee isn't just because a person in your building isn't an employee, you might want them to be reporting things anyway. So if that's true, you can always go above and beyond the requirements of Title IX in your training of those individuals. And then for all of these people, there can be conduct that isn't Title IX sexual harassment, but that again, you still want them to report. So you want to make sure that your training recognizes all of the world of civil rights that we're thinking about, and not just Title IX sexual harassment.
Sure, Jackie. So, I think when you think broadly, and you were talking about considering other laws, one thing that also came into effect in Illinois is a sexual requirement for sexual harassment training in the employment context that also applies overlapping with some of these issues. So consider, if you're doing training, consider something like also covering that requirement at the same time, because the issues, like I said, are overlapping, and so it's not necessary to chunk those off into two separate trainings. Also, consider your other civil rights laws. You and I have worked on a couple of different cases where the harassment is not isolated to sex-based harassment, and sometimes um, people aren't clear on, for example, with race discrimination, what policies apply, what laws apply, what process we go to. Sometimes in a way to better understand Title IX obligations is to compare it to other types of protected class investigations and obligations. Some may actually be surprised that they do have rather similar obligations, at least to do something and follow a process. It may not be the exact same process, but you can gain better understanding of all your obligations by covering them at the same time and comparing and contrasting. So that's another issue to consider.
Absolutely. And then we don't have it on the slide here, but there are some, particularly for those K-12 institutions who are watching this, we do have some licenses for K-12 employees that require sexual harassment training. So for example, the IDFPR, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, which regulates a number of professionals who work in school environments, requires sexual harassment training by an approved provider. And Frantic has sought that approval from IDFPR, so please contact us if you want to. Again, we're trying to keep you from having to do a bunch of different trainings for people that are essentially on the same topic. Instead, the better idea is to have something that's sort of customized that covers everything you need to cover, so that hopefully you can get it done and done well in the most efficient way possible.
So since we're talking about training today, we didn't want to exclude our free resources on the Frantic website. We have a number of webinars and presentations that you can access anytime for free. So take a look at our page. It may be a good way to brush up your own memory of different topics, or if you have a question that it's just, some of the topics are just now becoming relevant as you get further into a new school year with Title IX. Please take a look back at that. I think it really is a great resource. And Jackie, you've really spearheaded a lot of those. So I think those are great resources for our clients.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to remember too that training is not always, hiring an outside consultant or a law firm to come in and do a presentation for you. It can include having the members of your team watch these, resource videos, as long as you're documenting and keeping track of things. Now, we aren't meaning to suggest that these videos will cover all of the requirements, particularly for like your Title IX team, but for members of your Title IX team to really help solidify and build on the training that you're offering them, these are really great resources. And also, same thing with our Title IX Insights blog. There are a lot of articles on there that, again, if OCR were to come and ask you, what training have you done? And you were to say, well, all of our members of our Title IX team subscribe to the Title IX Insights blog. They read all of those blogs when they come out. That is a type of training. So we actually have a blog post somewhere in Title IX Insights that is about free training resources that are out there. So definitely make sure that you are familiar with those, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you ever need help coming up with creative ways to be in compliance. So we are not going to be doing a technical Title IX team meetup in August. We know everybody's got plenty on their plates, and hopefully you're all going to find some time to relax and unwind before the school year begins anyway. But please do join Jennifer and me for the upcoming LGBTQ plus webinar that we're going to be doing in 2 weeks on Thursday, July 22nd. We've been getting a lot of questions. There has been a ton of change this calendar year in this realm. So please join us for that. And with that, we are at 1 o'clock. So we will sign off. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. So take care until then. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.